Will you take a shower? Will you take a shower? Will you take a vacation? Will you take a vacation? Will you take this medicine? Will you take this medicine? Will you take the point? Will you take the point? Will you take a nap? Will you take a nap? Will you take a picture? Will you take a picture? Will you take a rest? Will you take a rest? Will you take a coffee break? Will you take a coffee break? Will you take a walk? Will you take a walk? Will you take in a film? Will you take in a film? Will you take responsibility for this matter? Will you take responsibility for this matter? Will you take it seriously? Will you take it seriously? Will you take care of the family? Will you take care of the family? Will you take care of the house? Will you take care of the house? Will you take good care of the dog? Will you take good care of the dog? Will you take off your jacket? Will you take off your jacket? Will you take 5 days off? Will you take 5 days off? Will you take tomorrow off? Will you take tomorrow off? Will you take $100 a day? Will you take $100 a day? Will you take the cover off the camcorder? Will you take the cover off the camcorder? Will you take off for your home? Will you take off for your home? Will you take punishment? Will you take punishment? Will you take an objection? Will you take an objection? Will you take a positive view? Will you take a positive view? Will you take part in the seminar? Will you take part in the seminar? Will you take over the duty? Will you take over the duty? Will you take apart the clock? Will you take apart the clock? Will you take it for granted? Will you take it for granted? Will you take this book for reference? Will you take this book for reference? Will you take 5 from 12? Will you take 5 from 12? Will you take up time? Will you take up time? Will you take up the receiver? Will you take up the receiver? Will you take down a sleeping bag? Will you take down a sleeping bag? Will you put money in the bank? Will you put money in the bank? Can you put the book on the table? Can you put the book on the table? Do you put this bag on the pickup truck? Do you put this bag on the pickup truck? Did you put me in the Sheraton Hotel? Did you put me in the Sheraton Hotel? Will you put the document in the safe? Will you put the document in the safe? Can you put your name down here? Can you put your name down here? Do you put your signature in the book? Do you put your signature in the book? Did you put out the cigarettes? Did you put out the cigarettes? Will you put the curtains down? Will you put the curtains down? Can you put off the meeting? Can you put off the meeting? Do you put on your trousers? Do you put on your trousers? Did you put your hands on your stomach? Did you put your hands on your stomach? Will you put aside money for the future? Will you put aside money for the future? Can you put Korean into English? Can you put Korean into English? Do you put your boss on the line? Do you put your boss on the line? Did you put up with boredom? Did you put up with boredom? Will you put your head back? Will you put your head back? Can you put the clock forward? Can you put the clock forward? Do you put through to the library? Do you put through to the library?